With today, so first thing I want to talk about is basically what we dealt with today's question. So that's a different part. One of the things that we want to talk about for today's question is when this happens, either when you're working like with metal. Metal is typically where it happens the most. When a screw gets stripped or the hole itself gets stripped. Okay, what ends up happening when a screw gets stripped or cross-threaded?
Doesn't pass.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It works incorrectly.
Yeah, basically, when the threads of a screw or a bolt or of a nut itself are stripped or cross-threaded, you end up having to force, you can tell it's getting cross-threaded when you actually have to start forcing it. A lot of times it should go spin in fairly easily. And what that looks like, actually here, let me get this part off first so you guys have an understanding of what ends up happening. In metals, when you strip or cross-thread a screw or a bolt, okay, a lot of times you grab the lights. So, this, has anyone ever seen them when they back out a bolt or anything? Have seen it? Yeah, what is this? What happened here? It got cross-threaded, okay? So, you can see that on these back parts here, and just from your experience with screws and bolts normally, that your threads should be somewhat pointed, whereas here they almost look like they're rounded over and basically have this extra flap on them. The reason why that ends up happening is when you're threading it into, whether this is the nut or you're actually putting the bolt into the peg, okay, it goes in at an angle. Okay, so you see here how these threads are grabbing. Trevor. So threads on one side are grabbing, but you can see here that actually on this part, you're having the two threads, they're not meshing together, they're basically running into each other, and that's how you end up getting that rounded over part. So a lot of times when this ends up happening, it'll start to go in like half a turn, maybe a full turn, and then it's going to start to get harder to actually twist in, and it's going to feel like it's tight, or it's all the way bottomed out, or the nut's as tight as it can go. But if you look, you'll actually still have this gap right here. But what ends up happening is you're basically bending over those threads and you're mashing them up.
Doesn't it usually happen with like metal on metal?
Yep, metal on metal, that's what I was.
Oh,
So metal on metal is a big part. The big thing that I want to mention is, if you guys, how many of you guys have changed your own oil? Okay. So the big part where this comes into play is when you're changing your oil filter. A lot of cars have the screw-on oil filter. So if you imagine that this was the drain plug,
That's
okay,
why you listen for
sir.
straight, right?
Yep, you always want to make sure you put it on straight, because otherwise that stem that comes off where the actual oil filter attaches, if you end up cross-threading it, or if you buy the wrong filter with the wrong size threads on there, you can actually strip that out, and then it's a big pain because a lot of times it's on the block, and you have to end up buying a whole new block just because it's cross-threaded. If it ends up happening with metal, you have your taps and dies, okay? So these are where, say that the hole actually, like your hole right here, the ones with the internal threads, say those get messed up, what you could end up doing is drilling those out and then re-tapping it so that so basically you're putting the next size up. Okay, so you're putting a little bit larger bolt in there, but the threads, you're still able to grip onto those threads. Okay, so you have your taps and your dies. We're not going to get much into this. The main thing I want you guys to know about is cross-threading and things like that. So when you cross-thread or strip that, that's for when you're dealing, like if you take Keating's class, metals at all, you'll get into that type stuff. the way, you want to grab one of the lights? The big thing that ends up happening when you have this set, okay, is it happens a lot of times when you're screwing into plywood. Okay. So if I put this down here, while I'm getting this set, who remembers what that distance is called between the threads?
Yeah, pitch.
The pitch, right? So, as I'm sitting here turning this, okay, it's a little time consuming. Okay, what's one thing that I could do to make it easier other than grab an electric drill?
Pre-drill.
I could pre-drill it. Also, we talked about the pitch. If I were to decrease that distance, basically decreasing the distance that the thread or the screw would go into the material, okay, that would not or cause me to not have to put as much torquing pressure on, but I'd have to make more revolutions, right? So I would still end up going the same distance or the length, right, the length of the screw, but I would just end up doing more revolutions. Something that's just kind of helpful down the road too, if you see that just barely the tip of this screw is sticking out, anytime that you have to do something like this, okay, it's easier to kind of sink your screw in through one piece and then just have the tip stick out a little bit. Otherwise, me trying to hold this piece here and the screw and trying to line this all up so that it's in the center all at the same time, especially without it being pre-drilled, is going to get a little difficult. So, like I said, some things that you could do to make it easier is to actually pre-drill this. You could get a little bit different thread. But what I'm trying to show here is one thing that you need to keep in mind and a benefit of pre-drilling, especially into plywood. Okay, and you guys can kind of hear that happening. Let's see if I end up getting this. No, not quite. I practiced this before and it worked earlier. One of the things that you can end up happening that if you don't get this in the center of your material, like this hole right here, okay, what would end up happening? What could you think?
It would slide off the side of the material to break.
Yeah, it either would break through or crack your material. So if you can see, this is a hole that I tested out earlier, and this is what was supposed to happen. Okay, you can see that as I'm forcing this in there, since I don't have it pre-drilled, it's actually going to end up cracking it. So part of it is because it's not centered, and the other part is because it's not pre-drilled. Okay, so that's one of the benefits. If you end up stripping this, is what I was going for, is to not actually crack this, but what I was actually going for, and I'm just going to pick on Derek because I know what happened to him. What happened to your handle when you were attaching it to your plywood side? Or was it Derek or was it Randy?
Mine was the bottom.
What happened to yours? It was stripped, okay? So, a lot of times when you're, like I said, when you're going into plywood, some of you guys will end up having that too on your projects where you're tightening it down and you want to get this so the screw head is flush. You'll tighten it down and there'll be a point where it starts to get a little tough and then you'll go just that extra quarter turn more and then it just starts to sit there and spin. What that means is that it's stripped. So the way that you can fix that, since we don't have a drill and or a tap and die set for woods like we would with metal, one way to fix that is to actually would take like toothpicks. Toothpicks are a common thing, and then you put some glue around the toothpicks, and then you stick those back in there, break them off. So basically, you're patching in that hole with more wood. Okay. That happens a lot, like when you're doing cabinet doors. like for your upper cabinets, your lower cabinets, or any type of hinges, when you're working with the hinges, if you end up mounting them in the wrong spot, you know, these are your existing holes, but you need to you either bought new hinges or the doors were catching on something, so you need to move them up. Okay, that's probably the most common place that you'll use that technique is if, like I said, there's a hole and it's in the wrong spot, or you ended up stripping out the hole. You take some toothpicks, put some glue on there, and you stick those back in and basically patch that hole, or you plug that hole back up. Okay? So, make sure you guys have the question answered.